consumer surplus, and producer surplus. I believe that all of you would have had siu rice in fast food chains before. When you look at the menu and think of what to order, you may discover something strange. The selling price of a plate of barbecue pork rice is $30, and that of a plate of white-cut chicken rice is also $30. However, the selling price of a plate of barbecue pork and white-cut chicken rice of the same portion is $35, which is $5 more than the price of plain barbecue pork rice or plain white-cut chicken rice. Why? To answer this question, we have to first introduce you to two ways to understand demand curves. The first method is the law of demand we've learned before. When we first studied demand, we already mentioned the definition of demand, which is the quantity of a good that consumers are willing and able to purchase at various prices. For example, you'd buy one skewer of fish balls when it's $10 per skewer, and when the price falls to $5 per skewer, you'd buy two. From the perspective of the law of demand, we'd look at the demand curve starting from a certain price level to explore the quantity of a good we'd buy at different price levels. Note, pay attention to the arrows. The second way to understand a demand curve is to regard the demand curve of a good as its marginal benefit curve. Marginal benefit is the additional value brought to the consumer by an extra unit of the good. For example, if the additional value brought to you by an extra apple is $3, we'd then say that the marginal benefit of this apple is $3, and you'd be willing to pay no more than $3 for this extra apple. So the marginal benefit brought to the consumer by a good is also the maximum amount a consumer is willing to pay for this additional item. This is exactly why we can regard a demand curve of a certain good as the marginal benefit curve of the good. If we look at a demand curve from the perspective of marginal benefit, we'd start at a certain quantity and decide the maximum amount we are willing to pay for an extra unit at different quantities. Assume that you just finished playing in a soccer match and you are so thirsty that you'd pay $10 for a can of Coke. After finishing the first can, you are now less thirsty than before, so you'd only pay a maximum of $5 for the second can of Coke. In other words, the marginal benefit of a can of Coke falls when the quantity of Coke you've consumed rises. Therefore, the marginal benefit curve and demand curve both are downward sloping. The difference between the maximum price a consumer is willing to pay and the actual price paid is called consumer surplus in economics. In a demand and supply diagram, consumer surplus can be represented as the area below the demand curve and above the price. Let's look at the following example. Below is Ming's demand schedule for Coke. Assume the price of a can of Coke is $8. The consumer surplus generated by the first can of Coke is $2, $10 minus $8, while the surplus generated by the second can of Coke is $1, $9 minus $8. And for the third can of Coke, the consumer surplus is $0, $8 minus $8. As the fourth can of Coke only generates a marginal benefit of $7, which is lower than the selling price, Ming won't continue after finishing the third can. Ming's total consumer surplus should be $2 plus $1 plus $0, which equals $3. Okay, let's come back to the example of siu rice. Why is the selling price of a plate of barbecue pork and chicken rice higher? It's because of the downward sloping marginal benefit curve. At the same price level, barbecue pork and white-cut chicken rice allows you to enjoy the satisfaction coming from two different kinds of siu at the same time. Therefore, your consumer surplus in this case should be higher than that of eating just one single kind of siu. The boss of the restaurant understands this too well, so he sells a plate of rice with both barbecue pork and chicken at a higher price. Next, we're going to look at another similar concept, producer surplus. Similar to what we've done before, we can understand supply curves in two different ways. The first method is the law of supply that we've already gone through before. Supply refers to the amount of a product that suppliers are willing and able to sell at different price levels. For example, when the selling price of an apple is $5, Farmer A supplies 50 apples per week. When the selling price of an apple increases to $10, he supplies 100 apples per week. By applying the law of supply, we'd look at the supply curve starting from a certain price level to explore the quantity of a good that sellers sell at different price levels. The second way to understand a supply curve is to consider the supply curve of a good as its marginal cost curve. Under perfect competition, the producer's supply curve is the same as its marginal cost curve. Marginal cost is the extra cost of producing one additional unit of a product. For example, if producing an extra piece of cake requires extra ingredients costing $20, the marginal cost of this extra piece of cake is therefore $20. The producer would only be willing to sell this piece of cake if you pay at least $20 for it. We can see from this example that the marginal cost of producing a unit of good is also the minimum selling price of this extra unit. It's also why we can regard the supply curve of a good as the marginal cost curve of that good under perfect competition. To look at the supply curve from the perspective of marginal cost, we'd start from a certain quantity and explore the minimum amount firms are going to charge for producing an additional unit of the good at different quantities. For example, your neighbor is moving out and asks you to help carry some pieces of furniture downstairs. At the beginning, you charge him at least $50 for carrying one item. After you've finished the first item, you feel tired and decide to charge him at least $60 for carrying the second item. In this example, we can see that the marginal cost increases with the quantity. As a result, the marginal cost curve and supply curve are both upward sloping. The difference between the actual price a producer received and the minimum price the producer needs to charge is called producer surplus in economics. In a demand and supply diagram, producer surplus is represented by the area above the supply curve and below the price. Let's look at the following example. This is May's supply curve for potted plants. Assume the market price of a potted plant is $40. May gains a producer surplus of $20, $40 minus $20, for selling the first one. As the marginal cost of producing the second pot increases to $30, the second pot would only bring May an extra $10, $40 minus $30, of producer surplus. And when May sells the third pot, the extra producer surplus would become $0, $40 minus $40. Since the marginal cost of producing the fourth pot is $50, which is higher than the amount May can charge, May won't continue her production after selling the third one. May's total producer surplus in this production is $20 plus $10 plus $0, which equals $30. So we've finished introducing the definition of consumer surplus and producer surplus. We hope you'll spend some time on this during your revision now and then.